you. I've just been enjoying So Done, and I'm now so done with it. And I get to talk with the author, and that's just the thrill that it is to be me, Rob Kent, in this modern age. You get to enjoy a novel and then chat with the author of the novel you enjoyed.
Love book talk.
So usually where I ask folks to start is I will never summarize your book because you'll stare at me and say, did you read my book at all? That's not what it's about. And I don't summarize other people's biographies. Why would I do that when you're right here and you could tell us what we need to know? So if you wouldn't mind, give esteemed audience an overview of your background.
So I have been writing young adult and upper middle grade since 2007. And now I finally actually know what I write. It's young adult. But because that doesn't really exist in publishing, it is really considered upper middle grade because my protagonist and my soon to be 3 upper middle grades are all 13 years old. So they're that audience that's sort of lost in the middle between traditional middle grade and young adult fiction. But I've been doing that for, I guess that's maybe 12 or 13 years. And So Done was my first upper middle grade, my first true upper middle grade. And my book coming out in September, Turning Point, will be my 8th.
It's going well.
I'm doing okay.
I assume I'm talking to you on a gold-plated computer of some kind at this point in your career.
No, absolutely not. That is not the life of a writer.
I had read something apocryphal about you, and I'll mention it, and then you tell me what's the myth and what's the actual truth. But I had read that you hadn't been that interested in writing, and then you had a job where you had money coming in for a little while, but you didn't have to work, so you decided to start writing YA. So tell me about that, the origin story.
So it wasn't that I wasn't interested in writing. I've been a writer my entire life. Everything that I do typically involves writing. Writing is how I communicate best. When I'm angry, I write people letters. When I'm happy, I write people letters. So, expressing myself through writing has always been my thing. Writing novels was not really on my radar, but I do strategic communications and public relations in my day job life. And I came into my tech company that I had been working for, and we knew that layoffs were coming. And sure enough, it was my turn and I was laid off. So about maybe 2 months after I'd been laid off, when finally my head had finally cleared from all the techie stuff, these characters just came into my head. I knew who they were. I knew where they lived, and I just knew a lot about them. So I began to write it down, and that was my very first book. So not the drama. And the characters were 14. And that was actually a series. It was a 5-book series that I did with Kensington. So that's how I came about. My husband was kind enough to allow me to spend a year writing. We just agreed that I wouldn't return to the full-time workforce. And it worked out. We got the book finished, and right about a year, to be perfectly honest, right about a year, I did go back to work. So the book hadn't been published, I hadn't sold it yet, but I did go back into the full-time workforce. And then I guess a couple, maybe 6 months after I returned was when I got the book deal.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So if you'd have got the book deal before you went back to work, you might have been thinking, oh, well, now I've got this and I'll never need to work again, right?
I might have thought that, but I probably would have gotten a reality check pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah, no, I know enough writers that would have worked out terrible. I'm glad that didn't happen to you.
Definitely.
So what's your first memory of wanting to write fiction, and then when did you decide that young adult is the fiction you would want to write?
I didn't realize that I wanted to write fiction until the character Mila. Mila is So Done. See, look at that. I'm getting my characters confused. The character Oh my gosh. Can you forget your own character's name? That's like bizarre.
Happens to me all the time. Once the
Mina.
book's done, and you wrote it down so you don't have to remember it, right?
That's horrible. It's because their names are too close together. What was I thinking? Mina from So Not the Drama, she came to me, and I wanted to tell her story because her story was not necessarily my story, but I grew up the same way she did. So I didn't see a lot of suburban Black girls centered in fiction. And I knew that there was a gap there. So that's when I knew I wanted to write. And the fact that it ended up being young adult just was very organic because, again, I knew that I hadn't seen those type of books out before, especially one that was what was more like popular fiction, so that it wasn't highly literary, what I thought was a little more commercial. I don't know if the market would agree with that, but I just knew that I had never seen it. So I knew that I wanted to fill that gap. I knew that I was writing for the young me. I was writing for the reader in me, the young reader in me.
So what was the process of writing that first novel? I mean, after 2 months of getting over the shock, did you just sit down and sit right to it, or how'd that come about?
Yeah, I was I was writing the novel, but I was also freelancing at the time. So around that time, I would get a couple of freelance jobs. I was writing for Girls Life magazine. I was writing for Black Elegance. I had done a couple articles for Baltimore magazine, but the freelance hustle is grueling. I mean, it's really hard, and you're trying to get these jobs, you're trying to get paid for these jobs. So while I was doing all of that, I was spending the time writing the book. Like I said, I don't think it took me very long. I don't quite remember how long it took, but I think, it probably took me about 3 months to write it because I, was writing all day in between the freelance gigs, and I didn't have a whole lot of freelance gigs. It was probably just enough to consider myself a freelancer. But so yeah, it was about 3 months, and then the process of finding an agent and actually getting accepted and then getting to a publisher, all of that probably took another, like I said, maybe year.
Which is an amazingly short period of time as some of these experiences go.
I came to understand that later. You know how it is when you just kind of fall dumb backwards into something, and I hate to say that because it was more strategic than that, but I didn't realize until after I already had an agent just how long sometimes it took for that to happen, and just how long it takes sometimes to sell a book. So I was fortunate. But I think it was having that time to fully allow the characters to speak to me and let me know what their story was that really helped. It's a lot harder for me now because I do still have a day job. So it's more of an effort to say, I will sit down at my lunch hour and write for an hour before I return back to day job, or I will, not go to bed until a little later so that I can get it done. So it's a little different.